من قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكرنا المسائب آل Muhammad. May Allah increase in our reward for the commemorating the difficulties of Ali Muhammad. Our discussion has been on the topic of justice, and we've touched on a variety of different areas within the concept of justice. And tonight I want to talk briefly about the idea of justice in this world as it is associated with the need for the existence of the master of our time, Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala. There's an entire conversation of how do we understand that justice exists when we have an imam, but we can't see the imam. Why does he need to exist? Why do we need to have this time period? That how is this fair? What is the reality of this? Again, tonight will be a brief discussion on the topic, but it begins with the idea that why do we need an imam that will come and that will spread and fill this earth with justice and peace as it has been filled with oppression and injustice? There's a few ways of answering this question. One, when we take a look at, for example, the verse of the Quran that we began with, that Allah states twice in the Holy Quran, once in Surah Tawbah, and once again in chapter 61, the 9th chapter and the 61st chapter. Allah explains and He says, هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَهُ رَسُولُهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ, that He is the one who sent down His Prophet with guidance and the upright religion, لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ, that it may overcome every other religion that exists in this world, وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, though the disbelievers, though the polytheists may dislike that it will happen. There are certain promises that Allah has made in the Holy Quran similar to this one, that the religion of the Prophet will overcome all other religions in the world, that have not yet come true or have not come to pass. Which is one of the explanations why we know that the Imam has to be present, because within the Quran, Allah has made some promises that are not yet complete. So there has to be someone who completes the promises of the Quran. Another aspect of how we understand this is that we say, and we make the dictation, and we say that Allah made Islam as a perfect lifestyle for the individual and the community, that within Islam are rules for all aspects of life and all aspects of society, to the extent where, for example, when we talk about Islamic law, when we talk about fiqh, most often when we talk about fiqh in its relationship to furu' ad-din, furu' ad-din, salat, sawm, hajj, zakat, khums, jihad. But fiqh actually extends further to interpersonal relationships. There is in mu'amalat, those relationships between people in society, how to buy and sell, how to deal with others, how to give gifts, how to have contracts. All of these are also explained, meaning that Islam didn't just teach you about your relationship with Allah, it taught you about how society should operate. So at some point in time, for Allah's justice to be complete, He has to demonstrate to us that if you followed my rules exactly, what life in this world would be like. See, up until now, we say that we should do this. We should live the way Islam wants us to. But as a society, it's an imperfect process in which some people do follow it, some people don't. So for Allah's justice to be complete on the Day of Judgment, which we'll talk about tomorrow, one of the aspects is that all of those things that he told us to do, there has to be a demonstration to say what it looks like when it's done correctly, so that his authority would be complete. Otherwise, people on the Day of Judgment would complain, Allah, you gave us rules to follow, but there was no way possible for us to follow all of these rules. Has it ever happened? You look at the laws of Allah and you say, how can I do this? Allah says, no, I will put a time period on this earth where humanity will follow my rules, and you will see the benefits of following my rules, and you will see that if you would have listened to me from the beginning, what quality of life you would have had. When we talk about, for example, that this earth is filled with injustice, and the Imam, inshallah, when he comes, will fill it with justice. The injustice that the Imam comes to replace is not just the injustice between humanity, that people will be abusive towards each other, but rather every aspect of the earth and its elements will be abused. Meaning the land will be abused and will be treated with oppression. The sea will be treated with oppression. The air will be treated with oppression. The animals will be treated with oppression. Any faculty that man has access to, man will have come to the point in time that it will be in an abusive relationship, that a man ignores the rights of everything around him and only cares for his nafs and his desire. And then the Imam comes to show what that justice will look like and what that process will look like. Therefore, it becomes necessary that if we believe that all of these promises that Allah has made, that some that haven't come true yet, and other obligations that Allah puts on us of what we should behave like, how can we be held accountable to something if we don't know that it can physically be done? So therefore, Allah says that within this message of Islam, there has to be a time when this example is established perfectly over the earth, and you see what it is that I commanded you to do and what it is that you refuse to do. To understand this, there are a couple of questions that are associated with our 12th Imam that we'll try to answer tonight. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. First is this, is to say that if the Imam is present, why can't I see him? One of the common arguments that'll be brought is to say, why can't I see the Imam? And there's two ways of looking at this. The first way simply says that if there is an Imam, and those who argue against us that the Imam is present or not present, they make the argument, then why can't we see him? Seeing him is not a requirement to know that he is present. Seeing him is not a requirement to know that he is actually enacting in this world and his effort is present in this world. To understand this, how many of us living in this country have physically seen the president? Or let's say, country of, for example, Argentina has a president. Have you seen him? No. Do you know he's there? Yes. Why? Because the order that exists within the country tells me that there is a government and an authority over that government. In the same sense, when we look at our own country, I may not see this president physically. Maybe I can see him on TV, or maybe I have an idea of what he looks like. But the reality of me seeing him does not imply that he is effective in ruling. The effect of his ruling is present by the order that is created and the security that is created in this environment. So meaning that I recognize the presence of the authority by the effects of the authority. Today, if Allah's authority is present on this earth, it means that the earth functions and there is a reality that is present. The authority of Allah on this earth is the authority by whom the wilayah taqweeniya is established. The wilayah over everything that exists is established. If that authority was missing, then the earth would not function. The importance of this is such that our fourth Imam Ali ibn al-Hussain Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam would explain and say that if there were only two people left on this earth, one of them would have to be the authority of Allah on this earth. When Allah established the presence of humanity, the first person he put down on this earth was his authority, meaning that the essence of this earth and its continuation of operation the way Allah desires it is subject to the presence of the authority. Therefore, if we see that the earth continues to operate, that the faculties of this world continue to serve us, it is an indication that that appointed authority of Allah is still present on this earth. I don't need to see him to know that he is present. Rather, the same way that I can recognize the authority of a nation to be present by the order that exists, by the laws that are followed, the same way nature and everything that exists is subject to the authority of the Imam. And if everything operates the way it is supposed to, that means the hujjat of Allah is present on this earth. This answer is still, there's more to it, because there's a second question that's asked and phrased. What is the point of the Imam's long life? Now, before we even get into the example of understanding what is the point of the Imam's long life, the question is, how is the Imam having such a long life? Now, it's true that Anbiya in the Quran are described as living long lives. Nuh alayhi salam preached to his people for 950 years and lived for almost 3,000 years. 3,000 years. Meaning Allah talks about it, and that's a natural process. One of the conversation that comes up and says that if the life of the Imam is natural, then it understands that the Imam is in hiding, that it is understandable that the Imam needs to stay in hiding to preserve his life. But there's a difference in the description of the long life of the Imam versus the long life of Nuh alayhi salam, for example. Nuh continued to age through the process of his life. But when it comes to the idea of the 12th Imam, it said that when the Imam will come and reappear, it will be as if he is a young man present in society. So the understanding is that now it's been 1,200 years, we haven't seen this Imam. For him to come back as a young man, it doesn't make sense that his aging process in his life should be natural. Means that his life continuing as it does is a miracle from Allah. The question then comes that if his life is a miracle, then why does he need to be in hiding? Because if the life is a miracle, that means that Allah is protecting him and keeping him alive. Then why can't he be amongst us and live amongst us in society? And the argument then comes into pretense, then what is the point? Then how do I know that the Imam is alive and he has a long life and that long life is a miracle? They look at this and they say there is ta'arud, there is conflict in these ideas. And the reason that we see this conflict and we have this opinion of conflict on the subject of the 12th Imam and his long life is because we assume that these items are attached and related. Rather, the long life of the Imam is not connected to the absence of being able to see the Imam. The other philosophy behind the inability, or the philosophy behind the inability to see the Imam and why he is not someone who is visible and living in society like us, living in the community as us, is the explanation of understanding the dawr and the time of the Imam. This is the Imam who is the one that will fill this earth with justice and equity, the way it has now been filled with injustice and oppression. So this Imam has asked Allah that, oh Allah, I don't want to live under an oppressor until the time that you allow me to change this world. If the Imam lived amongst us now, that means that over him would be an authority of a government of some type until Allah gave him the right to rise. And in the example of that government would be injustice and oppression. And that Imam would be subject to this injustice and oppression. And it is the right of the Imam that he has asked Allah that, oh Allah, do not put me under the authority of any oppressor. Every other Imam that we have has spent some portion of his life under the impact of an oppressive government that has repressed him. Whether you take a look at Imam Ali under the Khulafa, who prevented him from enacting justice properly. Whether you look at Imam Hassan after the abdication, and Muawiyah then being the oppressor. Imam Hussain, who lived 10 years under Muawiyah before rising against Yazid. Imam Zainul Abidin, who was oppressed by the Banu Umayyah and silenced and not allowed to speak and teach. Imam Baqir, who was restricted to the city of Medina and then forced to travel to Sham in the demands of the Khulafa. Imam Sadiq, in the same way, was abused in the city of Medina. For over 14 years, my Imam took the abuse that was given to him. Imam al-Kadhim spent years of his life in prison. At least 14 years of his life are written in prison for Imam al-Kadhim. Imam Rada was forced to leave the city of Medina and traverse to Tus because of the oppressor who forced him in that situation. Imam Jawad was forced to marry Fadl, the daughter of that Mal'un who killed his father. Imam Al-Hadi was forced to leave the city of Medina and to go to Samarra. Imam Al-Askari spent his entire imamate, with the exception of a year and a half, in prison. All of these imams were impacted by the oppressors of their time and were forced into the subjugation of that oppressor. But this imam is the one who Allah has given the freedom, and that's why he is absent from our sight, so that there is no oppressor who rules over him or no oppressor who tries to suppress him the way all of his forefathers from Imam Ali till Imam Al-Askari alayhi salam were forced. So his ghaiba, his absence, is on the basis that he is not overcome by the oppressors of the time. When we look at the idea, then what is the purpose of his long life? This becomes an interesting conversation as well too, that Allah has extended his life until an appointed time. One of the things that no one can tell us is that when will the dhuhur of the Imam come? We don't know. The Imam himself doesn't know. When we look at, for example, this time period, we imagine that we who know that there is an authority of Allah, that we are suffering, that the authority of Allah is present, but he isn't with us. The authority over us, our leader is the best of leaders, but he isn't with us. And we imagine that our waiting for him is a difficulty upon us. Have you ever wondered and imagined about that Imam, who is the symbol of peace and authority and who is the one who will bring justice, how difficult it is for him to wait for that time when Allah will give him the freedom? The Imam witnesses the injustice. The Imam witnesses the oppression. The Imam knows of it, but he is not permitted to interact in this environment. That this is a difficult period for the Imam as well too. Think back to twice there was a bombing in Samarra. There's something unique about Samarra in comparison to all of the other graves of the Ahlul Bayt. All of the other graves of the Ahlul Bayt, you go to visit a graveyard. But in Samarra, our 10th Imam and the 11th Imam were buried in their house. When you go to Samarra, you physically go to the house of the Aimma. That is their physical house. That is their property. They lived in that house and they were buried in that house. That is the house in which the Imam of my time was born. Twice they bombed that place. And my Imam had to witness this. The graves of his father, the grave of his grandfather, the grave of his mother, the grave of his aunt in his own house was desecrated. In our lifetime, we were alive. And yet my Imam suffered through this. The reality is that this period of ghaibat, we may see it as something that is a difficulty for us, but it is just as difficult, if not more difficult, on the Imam. And when it will end is something that we don't know. We pray that every Friday, because Friday is the day of the dhuhur, every Friday for a mu'min begins as a day in anticipation. And maybe this is the Friday. And every Friday ends as a moment of sorrowness that I waited, oh my Imam, but Allah did not relieve the separation between us. Oh my Imam, I was waiting that today my heart would be pleased, that your flag would be raised and I would stand behind you in your support. But Allah has continued our separation between the two of us. The nights of Fridays, Friday begins in anticipation, ends in sorrow, because it could be any moment. This dua faraj that we recite, every time we recite this dua faraj, when we recite sincerely from our hearts, when we call to the Imam, when we speak to the Imam, Allah shortens this gap. And when our sincerity reaches its ufuq, then Allah will return our Imam to us. But this period serves a purpose and a benefit. That it is a period in which the Imam is the witness over this earth and all of its affairs. The Imam is a witness of the condition of every nation and every people and every event in history. Such that when the Imam's reappearance comes, his knowledge of every nation and its people will be as if he is one of them. That every nation will acknowledge that if there is one to be an authority over us, this one knows us better in our history, better than we know ourselves. That the presence of the Imam is one of those things that is an indication and teaching to society that the authority of Allah remains. Which brings us to our third question. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are 1.8 billion Muslims in this world, of which it's estimated that 10% are Shia, which makes what? 180 million. Let's say 15%. 270, 250, 270 million Shias. There are 8 billion people, roughly 7.8 billion people on this earth. Let's say of the 270 billion people, 10 million Shias in this world, 100 million are men of fighting age. Do you think 100 million men, when the Imam comes, will have the responsibility to fight the entire world? This isn't, logically speaking, it doesn't make sense. So what's going to happen? How is this going to happen that the Imam will exert his authority over the world? How is it going to happen that the earth will follow the rules of Allah? When Allah makes the statement, وَالَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولُهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. That this religion will overcome every other religion on this earth. وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. Though the disbelievers, though the polytheists may dislike this. One of the interpretations and explanations is to say, وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, is to say that the mushrikeen will be subjected and they will be forced into the acceptance and admittance to the authority of the Imam. And this will be done through military altercations that will take place. And you start imagining and you start doing the numbers and the math and you're like, it's a lot of people. Could Allah make it happen? Sure. But there is a more appropriate way of understanding this. When it says لَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, that the disbelievers will dislike this, that they have been taken under the authority of the Imam and the authority of Allah has overtaken this world, that dislike that they will have is the dislike that a person possesses in their heart, though in their mind that they know that this is something that's correct. Think of it this way. When we, for example, take someone who is sick and we put them on a forced diet and we tell them all of the nice things that you like to eat, you can't eat anymore. You can only eat, for example, vegetables. Is that person happy? No. But he knows I need this and this is the right thing for me to do, though in his heart he is wishing for lasagna and pizza and nahari and biryani, and he's wishing for all of these things. But in his mind, he knows what it is that he has to do. In the same context, when Allah mentions وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ, that the mushrikeen will be unhappy, that they will be subjugated into this, it's not to say that it will be through acts of war and violence that they will subject themselves. No, they will admit that this is the right thing to do and this is what is needed in society. But their hearts will not want to submit to the authority of the Imam. So meaning even this verse is not a definition to show that, for example, Na'uzubillah, Islam is a militant religion and we are waiting for the day of war. No. Rather the understanding that physically speaking, logistics of even if let's say, that 1.8 billion Muslims agreed that this is the right Imam and this is the authority over us and they all submitted to the Imam. They're going to fight 6 billion people on this earth? It doesn't make sense. It's illogical. So the question comes, how will the Imam establish his governance on this earth when there are so many people in the world who don't believe in him and don't agree with him? Would it be just of Allah that all of those people would be forcefully subjugated to the authority of the Imam? We would say that Allah being just, it shouldn't be through the process of forced subjugation. Even our holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't forcefully subjugate the people. Even when the city of Mecca is conquered, and it's conquered through peace, throughout bloodshed, that city where our Prophet spent his entire life and was forced to leave because they attempted to assassinate him. One of the miracles of Nabuwwat is that our Prophet in less than 10 years, in 8 years, 9 years, conquers that same city that was attempting to kill him and does not harm a single person in the process. If Rasulullah didn't use warfare to establish the example of Allah on this earth, how can we expect that Imam Zaman would establish the authority of Rasulullah on this earth through warfare? So the question comes, how? How is this possible that according to the justice of Allah, that both the authority of the Imam will be established and people will follow, and that majority of humanity is not something that will have to be subjugated or oppressed in the process? And to look at that further, how can we oppress them into submission when the role of the Imam is to remove oppression? So the answer to this comes in one of the aspects of understanding the authority of the Imam, that the government and the rule of the Imam will be such an example of justice and such an example of perfection in ruling, that people at the time of the dhuhr of the Imam will have given up on every type of government. They will say there is no such thing as just governance, that no one has been able to establish a just government over us. And at that time, when the Imam establishes the just government, that people themselves will want to follow his government and will say that this is the haqq and this is the right and how humanity should be treated. And no one has done it before. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The people will have exhausted every system of governance. And it will be said that the Imam's government, when it is established, that people will say that even if we were given 1,000 years, we could have never ruled the way he is ruling. We could have never created justice the way he is creating justice. And that humanity will clamor for this path of following the Imam because it will have perfection in it in how the treatment of humanity and treatment of the world around us is done. People will want to follow it. So the question comes, which is the next question in our discussion. How do we prepare humanity to follow the example and follow the teachings of our Imam? And this brings us back to the concept of justice. We can't convert every person that we see. I mean, maybe you can. I don't think I have that ability. I can barely continue to keep this conversation going here, let alone give me Tom and Jorge and whoever else is on the street and try to convince them that this is the right religion. Is very difficult. But what I can do is promote the love of justice in humanity, so that when the justice of the Imam comes and is established in society, people will long for justice, and they will say, this is the true justice that is given to us. We prepare humanity and society by being the examples, the teachers, the protectors of justice, that we never allow injustice against any human being, and we raise our voice against it and collect humanity on the path of justice, so that people develop the love to see and follow justice, so that when the Imam comes and brings the example of justice, that selfishness inside of people that says me first, they will say, no, the example of the Imam and equity amongst all of humanity is more important than my desires. Our job today, and this is why the topic of justice is a central theme, that if people had understood the concept of justice and adalat, that they would not have stood against the Imam in Karbala. They would have recognized and seen the power in the statements and kalam of Imam Hussain, that when he says, one like me does not submit in authority to one like him. One who is an oppressor cannot have authority over me. When humanity understands the significance and the benefit of justice, then they will say, we don't want to follow an oppressor. We want to follow one who is just. This becomes an important example that we have to be the people of justice. Don't be selfish. One of the things as we're growing as a community, what happens? When an atrocity takes place in a Muslim country, we stand up. We say it's wrong, it's bad. But when it happens in another part of the world, we stay silent. When it happens in our own country, if it's not us, we say, it didn't happen to me. This isn't justice. This is that selfishness that we need to remove from humanity. We cannot be indifferent when someone is oppressed. We may disagree with their ideology, but their ideology does not justify that they become oppressed for it. This is the teaching of Ahlul Bayt, that we can disagree with you, but even then you are a human being, you don't deserve oppression. When we become the stalwarts of justice, that people know that if they are being oppressed, if they come to the Muslimin will defend them. Then we are preparing humanity for the concept of justice when we are recognized as the people of justice. And this is how society will accept that when the Imam comes and presents his call to humanity, when he speaks to them as one of their nations, when he brings to them fairness and equity, that the people will be longing for justice and fairness and equity. How do we make them long for justice and equity? Is show them that that is the best path, not the path of selfishness, not the path of self-interest, not the path as long as I'm taken care of. No, when we sacrifice to show that this is justice and we promote this justice and defend others, then tomorrow they will defend us and agree with us that justice is the best path in humanity. That is our responsibility to this world, which presents the next question, that how do we become ready for the coming of the Imam? This is how do we accomplish this goal? And to understand how do we prepare ourselves for the coming of the Imam, you have to look at the example of Abul Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam. Now, what's interesting is that in humanity, in society, we have a conversation over nature versus nurture. The argument between nature versus nurture makes a statement that a good person, for example, can be a good person because his parents are good people. A person can be successful because his family, his lineage is successful, therefore he becomes successful. And others argue and say that no, more than the family and the lineage, the nature of a person becoming successful, it is the environment that they are kept in. That if they are given a good environment, nurture, we can take anyone, and if we nurture that environment and give them a good environment, they can become successful. When you and I look at the example of Ahlul Bayt, and we look at these people that were surrounded by Ahlul Bayt, our immediate reaction is that it's nature. He's the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They are the sons of the A'imma alayhim salam. That the nature is present that they will be successful. There's some truth to this, but then there are exceptions to this that show us that it can't be just nature. Whether you look at the son of Nuh, وَلَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ, Allah reprimands Nuh when Nuh says, my son, Allah says, this is not from your family. When we look at, for example, the example of Abdullah al-Aftah, the son of Imam Sadiq, who set up a separate sect and deviated people. When we look at the son of, for example, the 10th Imam, who had a son by the name of Ja'far al-Kathab, who was known as Ja'far al-Tawwab after the Imam instructed. But what did Ja'far al-Kathab do? After the death of Imam al-Askari, he said, I am the Imam. Give me the money. Give me the wealth. These exceptions taught us that nature alone is not sufficient. It is the process by which the environment nurtures an individual that can make them successful. When it comes to the idea of Imam Hussain and the companions of Imam Hussain, all of these people in Karbala that stood against the Imam had at one point in time invited the Imam. The Imam presents bags and bags of letters saying that you called me, now you are thirsty for my blood. And a few people had the ability of understanding and knowing that regardless of what the cost is in front of us, the support of the Imam is more important than anything else. Meaning knowing who is the Imam is not sufficient to know that you will support him. Something more is needed. Because all of those enemies of Imam Hussain in Karbala knew who he was. Yet they stood against him. This is important because we know who Imam Zaman is. But the fear is that doesn't necessarily mean that we will support him. So meaning that we have to do more than just simply know who this person is. And that's where the level of understanding that Abul Fadl and his status that he attains is not through the aspect that he knew who the Imam was or that he was born to Imam Ali. That's not sufficient. It's something more than that. Something more than that has to be achieved. Which is why our responsibility doesn't just end at knowing that an Imam is alive. What the Imam will do is not sufficient. To have the ma'rifah of what it is to support that Imam, we have to spend and invest the time to understand and do certain steps that we see in the seerah of these personalities. The image of these personalities is so important to us because Allah puts a lesson in there for us that look at this example if you want to prepare for the Imam of your time. Which is why when we look at Abul Fadl, we may say his bravery, his bravery, his bravery. Abul Fadl's uniqueness was his ma'rifah. How does one attain ma'rifah? That's what differentiated him. That he knew the difference between dunya and the akhirah. In the 8th and 9th of Muharram, it is noted that the mother of Fadl was Fatima Kilabiyah, Fatima bint al-Hizam al-Kilabiyah. From amongst her clan was Shimr Mal'un. Shimr comes to the tents of Imam Hussain and he starts calling, where are my nephews? Where are the children of my clan? Where are my relatives? Abul Fadl, Uthman, Ja'far, Abdullah, these 4 sons of al-Banin don't answer him. Until eventually the Imam instructs and says, though he is an evil and decent human being, he is your relative, reply to him. So these 4 boys go out to see this relative of their ship. Shimr presents them with a letter of amnesty. And he says, here, I have secured for you amnesty. Leave this camp now and come with me, and you will be safe, and everything will be taken care of you. And what do they reply? They reply, you are ugly and what you bring is ugly. How dare you offer to separate us from our master? Look, the difference between dunya and akhirah. That they have the opportunity in front of them, that dunya, who no one said I have to be killed, no one said I have to be thirsty. I can protect myself, my life can go on. But they have ma'rifah of knowing that what is that life in the absence of the authority of Allah on this earth. Do we have that understanding? Tomorrow the Imam calls to us, inshallah. Tomorrow the Imam calls to us. Let me try again. Tomorrow the Imam calls to us. Ahsantum, thank you. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ya Ali. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tomorrow the Imam, inshallah. Will we have the ma'rifah? Or will we say, I have a mortgage? Who's going to take care of my kids? I have 6 months to finish my degree, then I'll be more helpful to the Imam. Let somebody else go. I'm just getting started. Will we have the ma'rifah? Will we have that ability to know the difference between saving our dunya for a little bit? I just finished paying off my car, or I just bought this, or I just got married. Or will we have the ma'rifah to know that when the imam calls, have the priority of listening to the imam, not my desire, not my opinion of what I think is right. This what was unique about these 72 personalities, that they had attained ma'rifah of who that imam is. Our goal is to attain the ma'rifah of the imam today. And the thing is, you can't attain the ma'rifah of the imam by just focusing on the imam. The imam is the authority of Allah on this earth. If you want to understand the authority of Allah on this earth, you have to submit yourself to Allah himself first. The path to knowing the imam is the submitting to the command of Allah and learning to follow the command of Allah without my entry into the command of Allah. When I can prefer what Allah wants me to do over my desire, when I can prefer the command of Allah without questioning it, when I can spend my time and focus and look first at what does Allah want from me before what my desire wants from me, then when I am approached by the imam, I will recognize that this is the authority of Allah, and the authority of Allah has more right over me than I have over myself. The ibadat of Allah has to be complete. The submission to Allah has to be complete. If I'm arguing with Allah's command, that Allah wants me to do this, but I don't need to do it. If I'm arguing with the command of Allah, Allah told me to fast, but it's too hard for me to do, then I'm going to give the same excuse to the authority of Allah on this earth. If I can't submit to Allah, then I'm not going to submit to the imam. This is why when we talk about Abul Fadl, his most important characteristic is not his bravery. His most important characteristic is submitting to the will of Allah. Abbas was an alim of this deen. Abbas was a teacher of the Quran. Abbas was an eloquent speaker. Then he was a warrior. You want to support the imam? Learn your religion and submit yourself to the will of Allah. Then you will submit yourself to the imam of your time. Because understand something, the submission of Abbas was not simply in a simple matter. Abbas, if we are to talk about Abul Fadl, we talked about the sacrifices presented by each of these Ahlul Bayt. The sacrifice of Zainab, the sacrifice of Hussain, the sacrifice of Hassan. Abbas is the sacrifice of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Look at his purpose of creation. When Amir al-Mu'mineen wants to get married, he says to Aqil, find to me a house which is known for its bravery, that I may have brave sons. Meaning the purpose of Abbas's creation was to be the representative of Ali ibn Abi Talib in the field of Karbala. He was created. He was created to be a representative of the shuja'at of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the bravery of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Karbala. But look what Abbas does in the field of Karbala. He forgoes his purpose of creation to do what the Imam commands him to. Abbas is born to fight. His purpose of creation was to be present as the sacrifice of Imam Ali in the battlefield. Remember when we said that when Imam Hussain was born, Rasulullah took him in his hands and kissed every inch. And when they said, why do you do this? He says, I am kissing my Hussain, where he will be wounded in the field of Karbala. Amir al-Mu'mineen, when this Abbas was born, held this boy in his hands and looked at the hands of Abul Fadl. al-Baneen asked, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, is something wrong? Amir al-Mu'mineen says, no. Fadl, al-Baneen, she says, why are you looking, oh my master, at the hands of this Abbas? He says, oh al-Baneen, a day will come when this Abbas will sacrifice his hands and his life for Hussain. al-Baneen says, this Abbas, this infant in your hand, this is that mother whose child has just been born. Hearing that her son will be the sacrifice, her son will be killed in the field of Karbala. al-Baneen does not weep. She says, this Abbas, the entire world sacrificed for the son of Zahra. May he be sacrificed. May everything be sacrificed. Abbas is raised to be that warrior in the field of Karbala. But look at the need of the Imam. The Imam doesn't give him the freedom to fight. The Imam puts him as his alamdar, his flag bearer, and stands him in front of the tents. The purpose of that is to understand who is Abbas. We want to talk about the bravery of Abu al-Fadl. Some people note and say on the day of Ashura, 10 of the companions of the brave warriors in the army of Imam Hussain, when the armies clashed, 10 men became overcome by the army of Umar Asad and could not escape. This one Abbas was sufficient to rout the army and bring 10 men back. That Abbas was greater than 10 men. When Abu al-Fadl went and attacked on the river, there were 4,000 men stationed in front of the river. One Abbas broke a rank of 4,000 men to capture the river. Abbas is greater than 4,000. You didn't understand. Abu al-Fadl is that one. You saw Abu Abdullah run into the battlefield time and time again. How did Imam Hussain go to the battlefield over and over again? It's because an entire army of 30,000 would not approach the tents because one Abbas was standing in front of it. Abbas was the security of the women, that the women knew that as long as this Abbas stands in front of these tents, an entire army will run in fear but will not come close to us. So Abu Abdullah, instead of setting this soldier loose in the army of Umar Asad to finish them, took this one power and puts him in front of the tents. There's a discussion that happens that some mu'arrikhin have noted, some historians have noted, that the night before Ashura, Abu al-Fadl was anxious to fight. He took Akbar and he sat down. He says, come, my nephew, let's prepare the battle plan. We will split the army into 3 sections. One section I will take. Akbar, you deal with that section. And all of the companions will deal with a third. I will finish my enemies. Then Akbar, I will join you. And then we will finish these enemies. And then we will help all the companions. Abu al-Fadl was ready to tear through the army. He says, Akbar, but one condition. We will not disturb Abu Abdullah in this entire fight. But the plan of Imam Hussain was something else. Imam Hussain put him in front of the tents. And Abu al-Fadl watched as the companions fell. And Imam Hussain would run into the battlefield after each one to bring them back. The children fell. Abu Abdullah went alone and Abbas stood in front of the tents calling out, O enemies of Islam, you make my master cry. You put him through difficulty. You kill his children, but yet you don't come to face me. Come to me. I cannot leave my position, but come, let me face you. Yet none of that army would come close to him. Until eventually at one point in time, Abu al-Fadl turns to Abu Abdullah and he says, oh Abu Abdullah, I am sick of this life now. I am done with this. Let me go. Imam Hussain replies, Abbas, you are the standard bearer of my army. You are the one who collects the soldiers. You are the one who leads the soldiers. You are the confidence of every soldier who fights. Abu al-Fadl looks around. He says, oh master, ya Sayyidi, now there is either me or there is you. There is no one else left here. In this, Imam Hussain and Abbas hear the cries of the children out of thirst under the heat of the sun of Karbala. Abu Abdullah says, oh Abbas, if you must go, then go bring water for these children. Under this premise, the Alamdar receives permission to enter the battlefield and to leave his station in front of the tents. This Abbas goes and breaks the ranks of 4,000 men. The army runs in scattered directions as this one man collects water and takes it to his hand. Some would argue and say that he wanted to drink from the water and then remembered, my master is thirsty. But the one who has ma'rifah to forego his purpose of creation, I say he was demonstrating, Mal'oon, you did not stop me from what I could take from you. It was the command of my master that has kept me. not you. Abbas collected the water. He began his process of returning. Omar Saad called to his army, stop him any which way you can. We could not stop them when they have been thirsty for 3 days. If Hussein should drink water, what would happen? They would scatter our ranks. So they began in treachery. Some would shoot arrows, some would hide behind trees, until one eventually came, cut the hand of Abu al-Fadl. Abu al-Fadl did not stop. They proceeded further. Again they came, cut the left hand of Abu al-Fadl. Now they became bold. They began to shoot arrows. Mukhtar says, when I captured Harmala, I asked him, what did you do in the field of Karbala? Harmala says, I shot 4 arrows, the first of which I shot at the water skin in the teeth of Abu al-Fadl. And I swear to you, as that water left this flask, the soul left the body of Abbas. Where does the master go? Where does the Abu al-Fadl go now? They say in this moment, when he stopped for a moment, that do I proceed? Do I return? I have not fulfilled the command of my Imam. A barrage of arrows came, struck Abu al-Fadl, until one arrow struck his eye. He could not see from the blood. A man removes arrows with his hands. Abu al-Fadl had no hands. He lowered his head to use his knees to remove the arrow. Mal'ud struck the head of Abu al-Fadl. He fell from his horse. A man catches himself with his hands. My master Abbas. Ya Sayyidi adrikni. Abu al-Fadl calls. Imam Hussain now calls in the field of Karbala. Al-an al-kasar. My back has been broken. My maneuver has been reduced. My enemies have been pleased. They describe Abu al-Fadl had blood in his eyes and no hands to remove it, laying on the field of Karbala. Imam Hussain approaches. Abu al-Fadl calls out, I know you wish to collect my head. I know you wish to cut my body to pieces, but let me bid farewell to my master. He will come to see me. I wish to give my will to my master. Abu Abdullah came, cleared the blood from the eyes of his brother, sat with Abbas. Abu al-Fadl would not let his head in the lap of his master. Yabla Rasulullah, if my head is in your lap, whose lap will your head be in? There are 2 bodies Imam Hussain did not return with his hand. One was that young Akbar that was difficult for him to live. The other was the wasi of this Abbas. Oh my master, Ya Sayyidi, do not take me back to the tents. Why? Maybe it was because he did not fulfill his mission. Maybe it was because he knew that the woman who had taken security in the presence of Abbas, they would now become afraid. They would now fear. Abu al-Fadl said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, leave me here, don't take me with you. My Imam turned his back and walked away. When he returned in front of the tents, he called out, Ala hal min nasir yansuruna. Ala hal min mughithin yughithuna. Ala hal min dabin yudhibbu haram Rasulillah. Is there anyone to help us? Is there anyone to aid us? Is there anyone to protect the haram of Rasulullah? On these words, Zainab comes to the door, says, brother, why are you looking for a protector for the women? Where is my Abbas? Abu Abdullah did not have words to reply. They describe he goes to the tents of Abu al-Fadl, the pole that holds up the tent. Abu al-Fadl's tent, the pole Imam Hussain knocks down, the tent falls. Fatima turns, Zainab turns to Najaf. Baba, my brother has left me. Hussein is alone in Karbala. Matame Hussein.